Into darkness and worse. Chapter 3. Leaving apparatus. Save for a mild headache, Volentus sluggishly awakened in a small cabin at 7 o'clock, if the twin bell clock was to be believed. He had been on a steamboat before, so there was no mystery on that front. Checking over his heart and not feeling the factorum gears for the first time in a long while was something like waking from one nightmare and falling into another. Looking over himself in the slanted oval mirror evoked sentiments of bondage, seeing only the shackles around his wrists. At least they had the courtesy to put his shirt back on. His black-laced, open-chested shirt and charcoal gray slacks weren't the attire he'd have chosen for a short stint in the accursed land, but he didn't get to choose the team's wardrobe. However, by his bedside, he noticed a small travel case. Inside was his favorite high-collared tooled leather cutaway jacket of black and darkened brown, featuring his satin vest. Involuntarily smirking, he uttered, "I didn't realize someone cared." Eyes of the ship's crew were on him like flies to honey, including 3 uniquely armored soldiers of charcoal iron, copper, and brown leather. They each wore dark purple capes and sported heavy pauldrons on their shoulders. Helmets emulating medieval gas masks were put off to the side. He had seen their ilk when Alicent and her squad raided Mercia to overthrow him.
"Sir Volentus, do come join us at the rail,"
said an eloquent voice from his side.
"Byron Biggs at your service. We were just admiring the cityscape."
Dressed too dapper to be a mission consultant, wearing a top hat and burgundy bow tie, the mustachioed gentleman beckoned Volentus with cane in hand. Dragon leaned over the gunwale, uninterested in giving attention to the necromancer. Ambling over to the port side, Volentus couldn't help but reflect Byron's outlook on the city-state from afar. Apparatus was far more profound than he remembered, though he hadn't seen any cityscape for years. It was a gilded megalopolis, glistening on the outside, corrupted within. An airship soared overhead, serving as one of their highest feats in aeronautics and engineering. Yet even such a miracle of human invention could not break the curse of the land of wilted roses. Nothing could break through its unseen barrier of mephitic squalls. A few had tried.
"Take a good look, Volentus, sir," Byron said. "It may be the last time we see such splendor. Shudder the thought."
Imagining the horrors to come, Volentus added, "You may just get your wish, Byron Biggs. Shudder the thought."
"Indeed."
Byron endured the necromancer's dark projection, seeking to clear the air.
"I hope you can forgive the dramatics last night, but we cannot risk the populace seeing you out and about when they believe you're serving a life sentence. If they spot you, a lie is uncovered, you see."
I see. Apparatus is notorious for concealing their depravities in all the glistening splendor. Dragon cut in, saying gravely,
"I stuck my neck out for you, necromancer. From here on out you will answer to me. We're tethered now, you and I. You may not care what happens to Alicent, considering your history, but our lives depend on us working together. The die is cast. Understand?"
Having a glance at the vampire's infamous sheathed blade, Volentus replied, "It is in my best interest to conclude our joint venture as quickly as we are able. My life depends on it."
"Ah, you mean this?"
Byron pulled a wad of folded cloth from his pocket.
"I'll be keeping your exogears here with me on the boat, while you all go on your brave quest. Don't fret, it will be quite safe with me."
As he returned the gears to its refuge, Byron then revealed the pistol equipped to his belt.
"No one will have access to it until Sir Dragon Celis has given his word. That includes anyone who'd endeavor to threaten me or our squad with tomfoolery. And to be transparent, sir, that means you, too."
"Jolly good, then," Volentus jeered, keeping in mind the location of the exogears for later. The apparatus skyline began to fade in the distance when Byron clasped his gloved hand and proposed their first order of business. A hearty breakfast was served for everyone, though Dragon, Volentus, and Byron conferred at the stern of the boat. Amid coffee, crumpets, and fruit, a common planning was at hand. The necromancer made the stakes morbidly clear going forward. The land of wilted roses was every bit of legend and more, striking fear into the hearts of most and damning those who were foolish enough to set foot under its cursed miasma. It was a land absent of God. Very few grasped the gravity of such a concept. Nothing worthy of life thrived there, not even plants, hence the name. Grotesque creatures and unholy spirits ran afoul, waiting for fresh blood to enter their dominion, living constantly in a prolonged ravenous state. Volentus abided by the rules of the accursed land, learning to live amongst the dead and the wicked. But even he feared the boundless perils of Malkira's ambition. She made it her mission to govern the forsaken land where the last sin took place, the unholy covenant between fallen angels and mankind centuries ago. It was the epicenter of a pact that turned God away, giving rise to the Brands. The forebearers attained a power beyond their wildest dreams, but could not determine how it would impact their progeny. That was the cost. Malkira sought to change that. Branded with abilities most viewed as depraved, she grew to accept her powers as an omen. Malkira soon attracted droves of other Brands looking to break free from the leering shadows of city-states. She joined the Tenebris, a growing cult that pursued the dream of branded children ruling the world, ushering in a paradoxical future where the offspring of the last sin replaced the heavens as the new order on earth. The void would be filled, the celestial power vacuum quenched. Dragon broke into Volentus's doom and gloom narrative.
Where does Alicent fit into all this?
I can't say, he replied, flustered just the same. Perhaps they see her as a threat. There are more questions than answers. Shaking his head, Dragon groaned.
But to stand in place of God.
Byron interjected.
It certainly suggests a deranged madness.
Already, our world has begun to react similarly, albeit with logic.
Dragon began, pondering the depth of the spiritual quandary.
Even as we sit here, cruising towards a land of darkness, people are acclimating to life without the presence of God. Soon enough, he'll just be the invisible man in the sky.
Volentus, not one to miss a good debate, said, Isn't he that now? Visibly bothered by his candid remark, Dragon sneered.
You should be more concerned with Malkira's schemes.
I am, he said defensively.
Her debased interest with Alice.
I know. Sighing out of frustration, feeling the accursed land nearing closer, the vampire changed tactics.
What exactly was your business out there anyway? I thought you were a detective.
Finishing his second cup of coffee, Volentus muttered, So did I. Growing impatient, Dragon snapped.
Well?
Wiping his mouth with a napkin square, his cuffed hand followed the other. Volentus prepared to visit a segment of his past. They sent me into the land of wilted roses to...
Who's they?
Dragon interjected. Not important right now. May I continue? He retorted, seeking some assurance that he'd listen. Taking a jaded flick of the wrist as a cue to continue, Volentus went on. I was originally charged with seeking out the leader of the cult, Mads Meraki, who I'm sure you've heard of, and eliminate him before the Tenebris could become a menace. Assassins had infiltrated the land prior, but never returned. So they sent in a Brand who would just love negotiating a land of death.
You!
Byron adjusted his position in the chair. Interrupted again, Volentus replied, Goodness, you're the detective in this group now, aren't you? Dragon gave no reaction. Upon Byron's awkward clearing of the throat, Volentus proceeded. It became evident, however, that even his own followers came to despise him, which resulted in Malkira killing him and going on to feed his remains to the corpse eaters. Lovely place we're going. And since Meraki was already gone, thanks to her, my mission was over. Except, as dangerous and morose as the accursed land could be, it was equally... When Volentus hesitated, Dragon jolted.
Equally what?
Connecting eyes, green versus red, the necromancer proclaimed, "It was something of a playground."
And that's why you stayed.
The vampire snorted.
You don't expect us to believe that you remain there to have a bit of necromantic fun.
Corrales probably thought I had died there. I was finally free to pursue my own interests, how I see fit. Or something like that. How naive I was. You know, I wanted to take that opportunity to return home, to cure my homesickness. Frivolous, you might think, but I'd been away from Mercia for some time. Volentus then looked out over the wilderness of the shore, replacing the cityscape with forestry. When Malkira was on to me, meaning she suspected I was sent in to disrupt her psychotic band of delusional oddities, instead of trying to kill me, as she did with Meraki, she accepted me. She saw my brand as something more than a morbid hobby. Malkira didn't see a curse carried down by our forebears. She saw a miracle. Leaning in, Dragon probed.
You join them?
Don't be ridiculous, he hit back. It was just something, or someone, I dabbled in at the time. Even Byron couldn't trust what he thought he heard.
You mean you and Malkira?
She enchanted me. Beautiful. Sexy. Loving at times. Rageful in others. Volentus cast his eyes downward. As priestess, Malkira became exactly what Corrales feared in Meraki. Then I began to fear her. Evil. Calculating. And she could make even the most horrific absurdity sound profound. It was time for me to leave. And leave I did. Home. To Mercia. You know the rest. Dragon leaned back, struck with the stark reality that it was far more precarious than he anticipated. If Malkira was as bad as Volentus described, then Alicent may have been beyond saving. It pained him to even consider it, compelling him to grind his teeth. He refused to live in a world where she was lost to him. If he needed to cut down everything that lived or moved to save her from that fate, he was more than committed. Noticing the psychic vampire grip the handle of his dormant sword in rumination, Volentus narrowed his eyes. That sword. Revenant. When Dragon broke out from his trance and connected eyes with the necromancer again, Volentus said, You'd best be ready to use it out there.
I'm devoted to bathing it in the blood of my enemies.
He retorted.
That was never in question. What about you, necromancer? Are you willing to kill that thing you dabbled in at the time for a vanguard you yet despise?
Grinning scornfully, he answered, Let's be clear. You were smart about something yesterday, using my thirst for retribution as a tool to lure me into helping you get to her. She won't die by my hand in the accursed land, but I will not save her. That's your burden. I'm far more concerned with what those boondock lunatics have been up to, and why they'd risk it all to seize her, knowing her status. I don't like not knowing. Signaling for the servant to remove the breakfast platters, Byron said, Knowing is the pivotal advantage on any board. Shall we discuss? The captain made the fateful exit, taking the distributary upstream. A crooked sign offered one last warning. To land of wilted roses, abandon all hope, those who enter. It brought Byron and others to pause. They did not turn back. Of the 17 on board, Volentus knew what vaguely to expect. Darkness, polluted air, spoiled earth, and a persistent, rank odor. There was a way to survive if one knew the paths, the secrets. It was no mistake that Volentus held the cards of life or death over the party. To trust a necromancer, one who particularly showed his villainy beforehand, was never the preferred choice for Dragon. It was the only choice. Bones and crows. One final meal before setting out. The party was too dismayed to disembark onto the old derelict docks without a full stomach. While it was midday by clockwork time, the sky had turned dark and muggy. Not fully into the land of wilted roses, and already the atmosphere was unwelcoming. No one had used the docks for what seemed like years, and there were no other boats or skiffs moored to the weathered wharf, a dismal contrast to the crowded waterfront back at Apparatus City. An armored trio of Dragon's best gorged durable kit bags of food and water pouches in advance. Not only were they the carry horses, but each of them were armed to the bolts with multi-barrel crossbow guns capable of firing 12 rounds each rotation. Steel survival shovels bladed all around, and a belt of grenades made them the ultimate excursion squad. Volentus couldn't help but find their gusto amusing. Their names were unimportant to him. All he cared to know was if they could keep up and take care of themselves. As they donned their helmets, then clipping them into the metal suits, Byron Biggs gave a final check and approved the debarking. Volentus watched as Dragon conferred with him separately on the other end of the vessel. His eyes glowed a bright crimson for a moment, then returned to their usual red. As for himself, he stood over the pier, looking at his shackled wrists. Of all the 5 members of the venturing party, he was the most qualified. Ironic that he returned to the accursed land in cuffs, Volentus thought. It was once the only place he was truly allowed to be himself, free of restraints. From the side, Dragon took him by the chains and started freeing each wrist. Even Volentus was surprised, giving a confused expression. Handing the cuffs to his mission consultant, Dragon said,
"As far as I'm concerned, you're now a member of my squad. This may seem like an act of trust. It is not. If I suspect you're plotting against us, if you scheme, if you hurt Alice in any way, I'll introduce you to Revenant formally."
Massaging his free wrists, Volentus returned, "Meaning you'll cut off my head clean?"
"That is correct."
Dragon's eyes blazed a bright crimson, like earlier. A strange sensation leached into Volentus's mind, typical of psychic vampires. Whether it was a mental tether or a peek into his consciousness, the feeling passed as soon as it came. Byron's rousing pat on the back clued him into believing that something noteworthy just took place, and he missed it. The entirety of the crew wished them a safe and successful journey as they left the steamboat, stepping onto the creaky pier for the first time. It was an eerily quiet place. Only the sounds of water lapping against the dock and the chatter of the crew staying behind filled the air. Up the way, Dragon had spotted the suspected dead drop where agents received and dropped secret messages. If there was any luck, Lucretia's latest letter would be stashed in the hollowed stump sealed with a moss-covered stone.
Any luck?
One of the soldiers asked from behind his metal helmet. Shaking his head, Dragon replied,
"Nothing. Still."
Another soldier signaled to Byron back on the boat that Lucretia still managed to make no contact. A foreboding sign. Nevertheless, the party had to press on. The necromancer and the vampire led the way into the accursed land by way of a broken path obscured by nature. For the troops, it very much felt like a walk straight into the bowels of the underworld. By the time the wharf was out of sight, the region grew dark and dreary. Going the right way hadn't felt that wrong in a long time. When the path was lost to leafless trees, Volentus took on the role of tour guide, assuming the lead position. Dragon followed close behind. His posture appeared laxed, but astutely aware. Little flakes of ash floated about as they traversed the ever more lifeless forest. A cool torrent of wind brought with it a wretched stench. Volentus knew the crossroads were nearby. He also knew that something stalked them in the darkness. That was before the unsettling moans and creaks that enveloped the place. "Stay alert," he warned. "There is a junction up ahead, an old crossway, where many eyes will be on us. You may not see them, but they will see us." Dragan gripped the handle of his sword firmly.
I sense something has already seen us, quite for some time.
"They won't harass us just yet," Volentus said. "They fear what I am. Perhaps some remember. Once we cross through the junction, on the other hand, curiosity will embolden them." "Why?" one of the soldiers asked. "Oh, you'll see. Roads lead here from almost every direction. Corrales, Durandum, Apparatus. Even the mountains have passes that swoop down to this very basin. The junction is a collection of abandoned antiquities from a myriad of places and times. There are many dead there. Death attracts death in this land." Volentus heard the whispers of specters carried in the wind. "The key is to not attract them at all." Beginning to dread the open roads, another soldier asked softly from behind the helmet, "Hard to evade detection from ghosts and goblins when you're in heavy armor of mass destruction." "True enough," Volentus replied, smirking. "But even you can skulk by with the proper diversion." The necromancer stretched out his hands, his eyes gleaming a vibrant green. Sporadically, the cawing of crows began to resound from far and wide. A few had taken refuge on his arms moments later. More flew high overhead, intent on congregating somewhere specific. Volentus's foul agents came from all about the forest to serve him. They all scattered when a pair of jet-black ravens claimed his shoulders, one on each side. Dragan immediately discerned what most of the birds had in common.
Your friends are dead.
Volentus sauntered on with a raven on each collar. "Is that what they appear to you?" Nearing closer to the infamous crossroads, he proceeded. "Birds, alive or undead, all respond in kind. Hold them too tightly, they are useless. Give them too much freedom, they fly out of your grasp. Crows and ravens have a connection with me, you see. We both straddle the world of the living." Finally making it to the perimeter of the junction, Volentus held up the party. "And the dead." More a graveyard than a crossroads, hundreds of bones littered the area. Crows kept it busy so as not to cause unwanted attention to the party alone. He gestured for them to stay quiet, move forward steadily, but take it slow. Emulating the maneuver, Volentus headed into the crossroads first. The rest followed close behind, avoiding the cadavers of the fallen. It was hard to tell how long some of the bodies had been abandoned there, strewed about like statues. The bones of knights trapped in their aged armor, lost fools braving the crossroads in desperation, and overconfident adventurers and merchants daring the shortcut were all at their feet.
Don't touch anything,
Dragan warned. Swords and shields, chests of treasure, and shambles of ambiguous things lost to the world made the dead zone a time capsule. Many of the roads that remained in the accursed land had similar, but nothing nearly as abounding. Hardly anyone, in centuries, branded or otherwise, ever made it past the junction safe and sound. For those who did, robbing the dead of their artifacts was something most agreed was folly. Curses lingered everywhere. With the crows as cover, they traversed the crossroads and slinked into the next batch of woods, leaving the smell of 100 years of death behind them. Dragan brought only his most seasoned warriors on the mission, and even they already had their nerves shaken. It was a bitter taste of things to come, though they preferred the paths ahead proved less macabre. Volentus quipped, "There's when being out of the woods doesn't really apply as far as idioms go." One of the armored few looked back at the horrors they crossed and gasped, "That was the closest thing to hell I have ever seen."
Agreed,
Another checked his bolt gun to make sure it was still ready to fire, just in case. Volentus surveyed his surroundings as he replied, "Fewer visitors these days. Just the sight of the junction makes people smarter, and they suddenly aren't interested in grave robbing anymore." "What is Edengard?" the same soldier asked. "I saw it on one of the road signs back there." It was Dragon who beat Volentus to the answer.
That was the name of the country here before the last sin. It hasn't been spoken outside in a while. They would much rather use the afflicted title it earned, taken from the poem about the covenant and so on.
"A gold mark to you, Dragon," the necromancer said, impressed. "Miraki and the Tenebris called it Edengard. Still do. For outsiders, it may be the last sin, but for the Tenebris, it is the Forebears' rebellion." And then he held up the party again. This time it was something he did not expect to come across. The others asked what happened. Dragon could see in his eyes that it unnerved him. Walking nearer, just off to his side, he asked,
"What is this?"
With contempt, Volentus identified the obvious at first. "A monument. A shrine to the mother of Edengard." Risen in front of a boulder consumed by dead vines fused to the surface, a shrine hosted what appeared to be the skull and spine of a female. Cleaned thoroughly, roses grew from the skull's orifices and cracks. Volentus recognized the tattoos on the cranium and various votives on the small altar, including what they meant. "The mother? What mother?" one of the soldiers asked. His eyes gleaming, Dragon said,
"Those are roses. Real ones."
Looking around for any mortal eyes spying from the trees, Volentus said, "The Tenebris made a shrine out here by the crossroads to make their point to God and the undying. They believed in growing a garden of roses in a land that has been without them since the Forebears' rebellion. It would seem they've started to make good on that promise, growing roses from the remains of their sacrifices." "Remains?" the same soldier gasped. "You're saying that skull—" "Fertilizer. Human compost," Volentus said. "Those flowers are rather fresh as well. This shrine to her was made recently. Let's not dawdle here." As the necromancer began to walk off, Dragon followed, asking,
"Who's this mother they worship?"
"Just when I thought you were getting good at this," Volentus proceeded deeper into the woodlands, away from the shrine at all costs. "Malkira is the priestess mother, and by the looks of things, she's growing stronger.